This is 2332 GMT on Tuesday, the 4th of August 2020. It's a bit later than we had planned, and this broadcast is coming to you from the East End of London. East End of London. And this is the item that we previewed by Yasmin Alibai. Yasmin Alibai is the most promoted, quote, Muslim, getting platforms on the BBC and other British mainstream media. Her main claim to any expertise starts from the fact that in 1989, she was inaugurated via the New Statesman as the, quote, Muslim named opponent of Muslims protesting against Saitan Rushdie. Now, in this piece, she is saying the colonized enriched the language of the colonizer. Now, she is obviously writing in the mainstream, the I newspaper, and it is not clear whether she wrote the headline or somebody, so-called sub or the editor, wrote that. The colonized enriched the language of the colonizer. She's obviously talking about the English language or the state of the English language. And in this piece, in the print, there is no mention of the concept of linguistic imperialism that Thomas Babington Macaulay promoted and advocated in his deliberations in the 1830s, early 1830s, before the 1835 Education Act for the colony was passed. And so therefore she's not really addressing imperialism or indeed racism. She is addressing a kind of surrogate, brainwashed subscriber to what actually Macaulay advocated. And all her references in this piece about India and Indian language, or the Africans and the language they use, they are absolutely confined to people who are not Muslims. So she left out all the Muslims, and she has obviously done that in line with the same agenda that she was recruited in 1989 to promote: antagonism to Muslims and denial of Muslims' rights and contributions and the originality. And she keeps promoting this character called Benjamin Zafania. She keeps doing that. She has done that too many times. Now, there is no reason why Zafania has actually been included in the list of Yasmin Alibai's mainly India as it is now since 1947, Indian characters and Indian origin, Indian descended icons and personalities. And so therefore she says hundreds of millions of global citizens speak English and change it as they go along, but she doesn't include in the hundreds of millions any single Muslim character or name. So we should leave Yasmin there for the time being, but we should come back to her in due course. And this is a piece on page 19 of today's Tuesday's the I newspaper, which is supposed to be a review of the suitable boy, a suitable boy, and she also, Yasmin Alibai, also typically distorts the origins of the city of Kolkata. And she says that the imperialists, British imperialists, the East India Company, founded Calcutta. They didn't. They took over Calcutta and they built on it. And all of that they did due to the kindness of Sirajuddaulah, the Nawab there. But we shall come to that at a later date and a later edition in detail. But today's headlines and updates include this reference to Yasmin Alibai Brown promoting the suitable boy in the English language, and she is not opposing empire, imperialism, and she most certainly is not even aware of Macaulay. If she is, then she's suppressing it. She is one of the brown-skinned English persons that Macaulay aspired to create, and she has lived it, at least as evident in her careerist coverage from the New Statesman through to the Guardian and other organs in the mainstream Fleet Street in Britain. And she has also boasted of having visited the White House. Now, that could only have been done as a reward, as a reward of some sort for her contribution to the anti-Muslim propaganda that was unleashed by the BBC's Newsnight program in the late 1980s, promoting Saitan Rushdie as the icon, the embodiment of free speech. As subsequent evidence have been actually collected and examined and reviewed, Saitan Rushdie was not a very good writer, not at least on that one. And Saitan Rushdie was not a supporter of the agenda that they hoped he would be. Saitan Rushdie has confessed to being a liar many times over, and he has been exposed in many events and incidents, and that show that he is not somebody with integrity. He has no real coherent agenda about morality, and he doesn't really oppose empire, imperialism, exploitation, denial of universal human rights of people, regardless of race and ethnicity, etc. Saidan Rushdie is now consigned to obscurity, loaded, of course, or overloaded with all kinds of benign decorations in recognition of his service to the cause of empire and in the demonization of Muslims generally. But otherwise, he is not somebody that they are promoting at all. Nowhere near the ferocity with which they foisted him on the viewers of the BBC, and especially on the BBC Newsnight, when the Canadian, now in Canada, back in Canada doing his politics, so-called, was given a prime spot to almost on a daily basis demonize Muslims. And the demonization of the Muslims was aided and abetted by a bunch of idiots in Bradford that took the bait and set fire on a copy of the Saidan Rushdie book. Now, literally thousands, hundreds of thousands of books, including hundreds of thousands of copies of the Quran, have been burned in the West and by Western agents and inciters. There has been no measurable, comparable outrage against the burning of the book, the holy book. But one token incident in Bradford of setting fire by about 20 people or so to a copy of Saitan Rushdie's satanic verses was used as the single most example of Muslim radicalism and Muslim intolerance and Muslim denial of freedom of speech and all the rest of it. Now, in the 30 years since that time, a review of all the participants in the so-called staged and actual opposition to Sayyidina Rushdie shows that those Muslims who are not radical, they're just protesting generally about somebody insulting their faith or their culture or their community or their humanity. And in the 30 years, Yasmin Alibai Brown has maintained consistently one thing: her career, her spot on the BBC and on The Guardian, on The Independent, on the I newspaper and the rest of it. But she has not actually examined the evidence of racism and racist surrogates and racist proselytization and the Christian proselytization. And the reason is she herself has been brainwashed and manufactured as an extension of the racist, linguistic, cultural narrative. And we have other examples from today's papers. This is the copy of the issue number 205 of the New European. The New European is the organ that is supposedly the platform in print for the pro-Remainers in the EU debate. And this is something that requires a fuller examination, but for time being, today's issue, it costs £3. Now, there is no homeless person that can afford to spend £3 on this one, nor can they spend, what is the price of this one? 65 pence for the Yasmin Alibai Brown platform, the I newspaper, or indeed the other newspapers that we have not got the print edition of, except the Daily Star, which is 50 pence. Now it's part of the Daily Mirror Group, which is part of the porn billionaire Dirty Desmond's empire, which he got rid of not long ago. Now, the porn billionaire has got no hostile coverage in this paper, never. And the only coverage that he had about his degeneration housing plot at the West Ferry Road, ex Printworks belonging to him, is a token, very safe kind of coverage. But I'm going to talk about the Daily Star of Tuesday, the 4th of August, 2020. In the front page, it says, Starling targeted. Now, Starling targeted, reading that would mean that Starling targeted by some youths or something like that. But in the context of Yasmin Alibai Brown, talking about English language, this is target of racist hatred and demonization that some other black players, black meaning African descended players, footballers, have been the victim of. He's saying in the paper on page 11, it says, 3 burglars targeted England footballer Raheem Sterling and pop star JK in crimes of envy. Now, this is of course about a general kind of burglary and whatever. But Sterling has been one of the main recipients of anti-black racist taunting and incitement and hatred. And the reason I'm discussing that is because of Keir Starmer, the leader of the British House of Commons opposition party, the Labour Party, and Starmer has been tweeting apparently in support of David Lammy, who has been targeted for racist attacks, including incitement to murder him, to kill him. And Starmer's maximum, toughest, most forensic response has been, we have no place in this society for racism. I mean, he immediately sacked Rebecca Bailey, or long or short Bailey, at the suggestion, at the mere suggestion of being anti-Jewish. But here is David Lammy, who is now in his shadow cabinet, threatened with murder. Incitement being published by traceable Twitter, inciting people to murder or threatening David Lammy with murder, hanging from the lamppost. And Starmer, the maximum we can say, in defense of Lamy and in opposition to the murderer, inciter, is there is no place. Now, this is an absolutely corrupt, dishonest, meaningless gesture by Starmer. Now, that may bring back memories of the Corbyn for PM mob. They thought that Corbyn was actually heading for a revolutionary takeover of the seat of power in Britain, and he was going to unleash a revolutionary social structure and atmosphere. But the evidence of Corbyn's doings and sayings belies that kind of fantasy. Corbyn is no different from Starmer. In fact, Corbyn has not said anything against racism aimed at Muslims, aimed at Africans, aimed at other deliberately chosen targets of hateful racist propaganda and incitement and intolerance. I say that because the targeting of anti-Muslim racist hostility in Britain is done by leaving out what the racists perceive to be non-Muslims, Hindus, Indians. The Sikhs are not allowed that exemption. The Sikhs are equally targeted for attacks. So Corbyn never actually examined any of this. And why that is so is to do with the 190 years since 1757 to 1947 that the East India Company empire ruled there, and all the events, including Yasmin Alibai's inclusion of Nehru and M.K. Gandhi in her list, but excluding all the Muslims who fought for freedom, including, of course, poet Qazi Nazrul Islam, who not only fought for freedom but went to jail. So we shall cover all of that, and we shall show how the racists target their victim communities and persons by intricately, elaborately examining the differences between those groups. And they actually updated their hostility and their imperialistic agenda away from Macaulay's initial collective attack on the Muslims and the Hindus and the Sikhs, of course, but the Muslims and the Hindus were the main targets of Macaulay's brown on the outside and English on the inside strategy and narrative. So, what we have here in Yasmin Alibai Brown's linguistic kind of misleading analysis about India and suitable boy and the colonized and the colonizer is a distortion that would please Thomas Babington Macaulay and must please the editor and the editorial commissioners of the I newspaper and of the Guardian and the BBC and the ITV and the Sky News, all of which have been giving her platforms for the last 30 years. And we have a situation where the education of the future generation of Bangladeshi parents or Bangladeshi children, Pakistani children, that is Muslims from the subcontinent, they are left in no clear position as to their identity. And this promotion for the suitable boy is actually being done at the expense of generally Muslim children and Muslim young people. And those who burned the copy of the book of Satan Rushdie in Bradford in 1989 have not provided any leadership and have not articulated any opposition to the racist anti-Muslim contents of the curriculum, of the English British curriculum. The Tower Hamlets based Bangladeshi's educational needs in Tower Hamlets, which I established by creating the Benth Bulletin starting from May 1983, are good. All of these things were argued in the Benth Bulletin and in the Benth organization. And I had argued at the Inner London Education Authority's schools subcommittee, the most powerful committee of the Inner London Education Authority, which was in bureaucratic control, curricular control, policy control of secondary schools from 10 inner London boroughs, of which the ILEA was made up. And that committee had people like the current chair of the Bar Standards Board, called Tessa Blackstone. Tessa Blackstone was elevated to the House of Peers in the mid-1980s. And I exclusively revealed that in the Benth Bulletin. And for revealing that, I was sent by courier in mid-1980s by courier. It was a very serious event to receive a courier carried and delivered legal action notice served by the most rewarded ethnic surrogate, Harman Ousley. Harman Ousley is the most decorated and well-rewarded ethnic surrogate mental slave serving the cause of the racists that has ever existed in the last 100 years. And Ousley sent me a courier-carried legal notice saying that I should not publish anything about Tessa Blackstone. Now, Blackstone was still employed as the education officer or as an education section kind of leader in the Inner London Education Authority. And she attended a large number of the sittings of the school subcommittee where I quizzed her. Now, I quizzed her and the others capitulated to her. So that went on for at least a good 3 years, if not 4. So Tessa Blackstone was exposed every time I had reason to quiz her about a policy statement or a policy document in the Inner London Education Authority or in the name of the Inner London Education Authority. Now, this week, I understand that Tessa Blackstone is chair of the Bar Standards Board. And on that, I shall be discussing the role of the 4 Inns of Court in regulating the behavior of their admitted barristers or license holders. Tessa Blackstone self-confessed racist to being racist while she was still in the employment of the ILEA. But she did begin to when she found that the ILEA was being abolished. So she sent me a short letter by post, of course, in which she says that racism was going to continue. But she actually was writing to me in reply to my assertion to her on the facts that she was supporting racism. She obviously denied that, but she, at the same time, while she denied that, she said that racism was going to continue. She did not say what she would be doing to oppose racism, but that is what she said. Shortly after that, the ILU was scrapped, and with it, all the committee and everything was kind of scrapped. So therefore, I had no time or formal process opportunity to quiz her on that reply she had sent to me. I shall be updating on that exchange or on that communication in the near future. As the chair of the Bar Standards Board, Tessa Blackstone is not a barrister, as far as I know, and she is not somebody who has got the entitlements to be chair of the Bar Standards Board, because the standards of the bar, I think, and I have told the bureaucrat in charge of the Lincoln Inn this week that the standards must be adhering to the standards and requirements of the international treaties of which the UK remains an active signatory. And I drew particular attention to the founding declarations of the United Nations, which was founded on the 10th of December 1948, and also to the Treaty of Rome 1950. The following years saw the inclusion of the Treaty of Rome Declaration in various European countries' domestic legislation. The UK was one of the last to publish or to pass or enact the 1998 Human Rights Act, which includes some of the declarations, but not all of them. But even those limited articles and declarations in the 1998 Human Rights Act in United Kingdom are being violated by the barristers, by the courts, and by the legal bureaucracy. And so therefore I will ask the Bar Standards Board what their justification or excuse is for allowing that kind of behavior, which breaches the UK's treaty obligations to uphold universal human rights and values. So we have a situation in Tower Hamlets where the negligent killing of the child, Alexia Wakanabia, I think. Alexia, her name I shall check in a minute. Alexia was killed on the 17th of July 2015 in the Myland Park playground, right in front of her mother. A rotting tree branch fell on her, and it was found later that it was rotting and should not have been allowed to stay in the structure, and it was more than 4 years old. So it was too rotten to be relied on by a child swinging from it. So the Tower Hamlets Council for the last 5 years has been engaged in series of battles, legal battles, waged by her mother for justice for Alexia. And in the 5 years, Tower Hamlets Council has spent, if not millions, at least hundreds of thousands of pounds in denying any liability, any responsibility. Finally, Tuesday's news is that the Health and Safety Executive decided to prosecute, that is, sue for criminal misconduct or wrongdoing, the Tower Hamlets Council. And that news is, of course, accompanied by the detail that Tower Hamlets Council had now allocated £2 million for the purpose of meeting the legal costs that they anticipate. Now, since that girl was killed, the Khoodeelaar campaign has been supporting from a distance, not by contacting the mother, but on principle from a distance, giving the support on every occasion that there was any mention in public about any stage her mother had passed or reached in the battle for justice for her child who was devastatingly killed in front of her. We have supported consistently on the constitutional law obligation and the general common law principle. And we are marking this today to say that we have not discriminated against any person based on their race, ethnicity, whatever. We have upheld the principles in calling for justice for Alexia in the last 5 years, based entirely on our human rights and on the human rights of her devastated mother. Now, that should have been done by the elected councillors. I am asking, inviting, challenging any of the elected councillors who have been in place in the last 5 years since the child was killed by negligent Tower Hamlets Council, if they made any call on the record, if they made any demand for justice for this child and for actual settlement with her mother. If they did they do that in private communications? Let them publish the fact that they did that in private communications, and they cannot publish the details of the private communication except that they did make any such demand. If they did put a motion or motions on the agenda of any of the meetings, either full meetings so-called or committee meetings, let them publish those things because those are public. If there is any reason for confidentiality and privacy, let them explain what aspect of the privacy precludes them from publishing that detail. If there is none, let them publish the full facts. And if they didn't make any demand, and if they didn't put any motion, then what has been their excuse? And why should they not be condemned as unfit for council positions in Tower Hamlets? And the same thing happens with the demand that we have been making now over the negligent killing of June Harvey on 8th of July 2020 in the Wattsgrove estate concerned, where the housing degenerated Swan Housing had employed this killing, deadly killer crane. And what is the actual evidence of the Tower Hamlets councillors demanding from Biggs answers as to how the building control liabilities were withheld in favor of Swan Housing being given this carte blanche so that it could kill and maim and injure and make homeless any number of people in the Wattsgrove area. And we are saying that the same goes for the two elected MPs. What role have they played in actually holding the council to account for safety, literally safety grounds, safety of buildings and safety in the communities? And the fact that the child that was killed by negligence on the 17th of July 2015 was also let down by the remit, what is now called the Safeguarding Children remit. What part of what law did Tower Hamlets councils, highly paid, overpaid post holders could cite or invoke to say that they were justified in neglecting the duty to make sure that the structure at the Myland Park playground was safe beyond any doubt? The statement that they've issued to the reporters working for the BBC funded kind of platform called the Local Democracy Reporter, Rachel Barford, whose byline appears both in the Evening Standard and in the Archant owned East London Idiotizer, which craftily did not find Mike Brook the crook to write this effectively condemning piece, condemning the role of John Biggs. Mike Brook the crook is only available when there is something to sing in praise of John Biggs. The diminution of duty person, the diminutive mayor doing the diminution of his duties as the mayor of the East London Borough. So, safeguarding of children duties are being abandoned time after time after time after time. The safety of buildings is being abandoned time after time after time after time by Towners Council. And safeguarding of children is abandoned in the actual allowing of hundreds, if not thousands, hundreds of young persons, mainly, not exclusively, but mainly from the Bangladeshi community or Bangladeshi background into our hamlets, falling into or getting recruited into the drugs trade and crime. Where is the safeguarding the children remit gone? What explanation has Biggs to give on abandoning these hundreds of children, thousands? They must amount to at least 1,000 being allowed to be lured into, pushed into, eased into lives of crime and criminality that is infecting the rest of the community and destroying the rest of the community, and mainly adversely affecting the parts of the Borough that Bangladeshis live in, parts of the Borough that John Biggs, in his racistly poisonous, untruthful assertion, had said the Bangladeshi community, Bangladeshi inhabited areas, when Biggs wanted to find an excuse to attack Luther Rahman. And Biggs did that in September 2013 via the BBC London in order to ingratiate himself electorally to mostly white populated parts in London E3, where the white, very white, 85-year-old June Harvey was killed, and four others were injured, and hundreds of local people were made homeless or made to flee their homes on the 8th of July 2020. Now, where is Biggs giving his explanation to those people as to what he has done for them, because he apparently was concerned for them being white people as opposed to the Bangladeshis that he wrongly claimed were being given favorable treatment and priority by Lutfur Rahman. The fact is that Lutfur Rahman never gave favorable treatment to people because they were Bangladeshis. Anyone or any group or any number of people that benefited financially or organizationally or by reference during the years that Lutfur Rahman was in post as the so-called elected mayor, they were only ever given any favor or benefit or preferment by Lutfur or by his reference or by his internal bureaucratic influence, because he calculated that they would give him electoral returns and benefits, not because they were Bangladeshis, not because they were Muslims, not because of any other ethnicity linked reason. Lutfur calculated simply on getting the votes. Of course, the votes he got were discarded and condemned as having been obtained by corrupt and criminal wrong means by Richard Morey, who declared Lutfur not elected, Lutfur's election voided in the ruling published on the 23rd of April 2015. Now, April 2015, May 2015, June 2015, July 2015, that is 3 months, May, June, July, 3 months after Lutfur was ousted, this poor child was killed. And it shows that the rotting structure had been there for at least most of Lutfur's time in post in that corruptly held, corruptly created, and corruptly maintained post of elected mayor. So all the evidence points every time to the fact that this post is wasteful and it is a risk to too much or too far to the safety of people. The fact that £2 million has been earmarked and allocated has absolutely profound topical significance. If they can find £2 million to fend off a legal challenge by the distraught mother of the child Alexei, how is it that Biggs is now making people compulsorily redundant or sacking them en masse because of financial shortage, or he is making excuses about lack of resources in meeting other service responsibilities? So this needs to be questioned by the elected councillors. Where are they? We can question, we can say it, and we're saying it for their help and direction and guidance. But they have to put it formally in letters and in questions and in challenges to Lutfur Rahman. If they don't, and if they won't, then they should not be in that post. They should resign en masse. This £2 million is just a tip of the iceberg. Weeks also has spent millions of pounds in diverting funds in order to keep himself in that post by bribing councillors and other people in the community strategically. So all the money that Biggs has allocated, or Biggs has actually sanctioned, or Biggs has initiated the spending of, since he got in on the 11th of June 2015, must be published. They have not been published. They must be published. And without publishing those, there is no way of knowing just how badly the community in Tower Hamlets is being ill-served by this mayor system and the actual deadly silencing of the elected councillors. And as far as the so-called opposition, which in the times of the Conservatives had central government power, it becomes ludicrous to even talk about the Conservative opposition in Tower Hamlets. There is no Conservative opposition in Tower Hamlets. There is only one councillor in place called Peter Golds. His Twitter handle says, "Go for Golds." Now, how absolutely brazen, shamelessly arrogant that is. Not only is he not made of golds, he is made of poison in rhetoric, in agenda, in association. He is associated with the vilest anti-Muslim racist in all of Western Europe, and it is Katie Hopkins. We have discussed Peter Gold's association with Katie Hopkins in the past, and we shall come to that in later editions. But the fact is that he is the only con-carrying councillor on Tower Hamlets. Now, he lied, and I'm saying this on the record. Peter Golds lied about his principle. He said at first that he was against the mayor system, elected mayor system. Weeks later, he turned out to be for the mayor system. There was no change in the facts. There was no change in the evidence. There was no change in the composition of the population in Tower Hamlets. So the councillors who were in place at that time, when he did that, some of them are still councillors. They never challenged him. And they are not conservative councillors, because there is only one conservative councillor now, and until a few months ago there were only two. But even if there are two, that is not anywhere near the number matching the majority that occupy the council and elected posts. None of them has challenged Peter Goals. Why? And this raises the question about Andy Arlam. Andy Arlam is a notorious ignorant racist. How dare he stand as an anti-corruption candidate and then stay silent on every single incident of corruption, criminality, negligence perpetrated by the Tower Hamlets Council over the years? So that is a question we reiterate for Andy and Peter. Both of them were claiming at one stage or another to be against the mayor system, and both of them supported the mayor system shortly after that. And Andy Arlam keeps standing as a candidate. I mean, he keeps standing. He keeps standing, but he fails to get even 200 or maybe 250 votes. So, what is the point of this guy standing? Unless he wants to reduce to the lowest level of ridicule the claim that he is against corruption. He is not against corruption. He has not fought against crooks in the council. He has not supported any campaign against the corrupt Tower Hamlets Council. So we'll go to David Lammy. Now, David Lammy has been the target of racist incitement and hatred big time. And as we said in the preview, he has been supported by Keir Starmer, who has issued a statement, pathetic statement saying there is no place for such hatred in our society or our party or whatever. Now, it is the same Keir Starmer, who had no hesitation in sacking Rebecca Long Bailey for her alleged retweeting or endorsement of an allegedly anti-Jewish tweet or social media post. And without going into the details of everything that Keir Starmer has done in the past, let us put in context the opposite of Starmer's futile anti-racist stunt. The opposite is, of course, Chris Williamson. Williamson has done a social media post that we have seen during the day on Tuesday, talking about the role played by the ECHR, the Equality and Human Rights Commission or whatever, that was set up during the time of the last Labour government, and it was Hattie Harman who was featured in a footage that Chris Williamson showed with Peter Mandelson and Trevor Terrible Pealeves. Now, Trevor Terrible Pealeves was promoted at breakneck speed by the Labour government, who appointed him the chair of the Commission for Racist Enslavement. That is what I called it, CRE, the Commission for Racist Enslavement. And they could not find a more fitting mental slave than Trevor Terrible Pealeves. Now, the reason why I'm mentioning this social media post by Chris Williamson is because Williamson is only referring to Terrible Pealeves and Harriet Harman and Peter Mandelson because he wants to make the point, Chris Williamson, that the Equalities and Human Rights Commission is now investigating or has been investigating Jeremy Corbyn and his anti-Jewish alleged leanings and role. Peter Williamson is not doing this because he wants to be opposing racism. Remember that. Peter Williamson is not opposing racism. He is making a comparative study of the roles, various roles played by the ECHR or whatever in relation to its hostility to Jeremy Corbyn as opposed to its complicity or compliance or collusion with Corbyn's opponents. So, Keir Starmer is not against racism, nor is Jeremy Corbyn's main man. Chris Williamson is the main man who was actually the highest profile alleged anti-Jewish person backing the Corbyn leadership. So that raises the question as to where is the opposition to racism to come from? To come from. The main opposition is not against racism, not even the most promoted anti-racist called Jeremy Corbyn. If that is the case, then it proves going backwards, as we have said in the print, in the post, in the texts on the Facebook and other posts we have made. Corbyn, since he became an MP in the late 1980s, around 1980s, took part in a lot of internal lobbying that goes on among MPs. And one of the most consistent or persistent method or event is called EDM. E, early, D, J, M motions. So the EDMs are kind of excuses to flag up, to raise an issue, knowing full well the most EDMs are never actually passed. But that is a guide, that is a clue, a very reliable clue as to the thinking of a particular MP over the years. And we have said this before about George Galloway. The Galloway never really did anything with the idioms to promote the constituency in Bethnal Green and Bow. And it is not my assertion, it is on the records. So anyone can check that. And if they find that there was anything that substantially alters my observation, let me know. And I shall accordingly fact check the assertion and I shall review. And if it is found that I have in any way left out anything that Galloway rightly deserves to be included, I shall include that. And in the case of Corbyn, it is the same. Corbyn and Galloway have belonged in Parliament to the same trend. They are spouters of socialist slogans. They are not practitioners of socialist slogans. They are spouters of anti-racism. They are not practitioners of anti-racism. In fact, Galloway has been so venomously personally hostile to David Lammy that if his venom is put together, then it will not be very easy to distinguish Galloway's venoms against David Lammy from the racist, expressly racist, overtly racist racism and hostility that we are talking about in relation to the events of the week, where Lammy has been threatened with death and death by hanging from a lamppost unless he stops talking against racism. And it is there that Keir Starmer has failed to come forward and take action against the racists, either by calling for particular, express, permanent, lasting sanctions against the social media platforms for inciting hatred and racism and hostility or crime and criminality or similar. But he has not done that. So we shall be talking more about all of these issues in the next edition. This is coming to midnight 26 hours GMT and 0126 hours UK time on Wednesday, the 5th of August 2020. Until the next time, until the next edition, this is the test edition containing original contents that are covered by international authorship rights and laws and the UK copyright laws and other personally owning the contents laws and protections. And these are all asserted by me presenting and editing this program, Muhammad Haque, the Khoodeelaar television channel, saying goodbye at midnight 27 GMT on Wednesday, the 5th of August 2020. 2020 until the next edition, the next bulletin.